A mysterious signal emerges. The sky above Earth was still, peaceful even, as the vast network of satellites and sensors scattered around the planet quietly scanned the universe. But something was different today, something that would change everything. The silence was broken by a single faint signal. It was so weak at first that no one noticed, but as the minutes passed, the signal grew stronger, cutting through the endless noise of space. It wasn't a random signal. It had a pattern, a rhythm. It was unlike anything Earth scientists had ever encountered. Dr. Eliza Martin, the head of Earth's Advanced Communications team, sat in her small, dimly lit office. The hum of the monitors was the only sound that could be heard, until suddenly, the signal came through. "Wait, what's that?" She whispered to herself, staring at the blinking lines of data on the screen. The signal had an unusual quality, a repeating structure, almost as though it was deliberate. She quickly contacted the rest of her team. "Get in here now." Eliza's voice carried a sense of urgency that made everyone stop in their tracks. Within moments, her team rushed into the room, their faces filled with confusion and curiosity. She pointed to the screen, where the mysterious signal continued to pulse. "We've never seen anything like this before," said Sergeant Riley, one of the team's communication experts. His hands hovered over his console, but he didn't dare touch anything just yet. Eliza's mind raced. Could this be from another civilization? She wondered aloud. The idea seemed impossible. Humanity had been watching the stars for centuries, but this was different. This was something new, something that seemed far beyond anything Earth had ever discovered. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in concentration. The signal wasn't just random noise, like the usual cosmic static. It had structure, a series of pulses, with patterns that repeated themselves at precise intervals. But what was more alarming was that it seemed to be coming from deep within the uncharted regions of space, too far for Earth's existing probes to reach. She felt a chill crawl down her spine. "This isn't from any natural source," she said, more to herself than to her team. The signal was not just a message, it was a warning. The room fell silent. Each team member exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the weight of what Eliza had just said. Was this a call for help, or something far darker? No one could be sure, but what they did know was that the signal wasn't going to stop on its own. As the signal continued to pulse, Eliza ordered a series of tests to analyze it further. She needed to be absolutely certain about what they were dealing with before they informed the authorities. She quickly ran simulations and tried to decode the patterns in the signal. Each attempt brought more questions than answers, but one thing became clear: this was no random transmission. Outside the command center, tensions were rising. News about the mysterious signal had already begun to leak. The first whispers of it reached the public and spread like wildfire, stirring fear and curiosity alike. Was it a distress call from an alien species, or was it the first sign of something more dangerous approaching Earth? Eliza and her team worked tirelessly throughout the night, their eyes bloodshot from staring at the screens, their minds fixed on unraveling the mystery. The patterns of the signal seemed to grow more complex with every attempt to analyze it. They couldn't make sense of it, yet it was undeniable. This was something that needed to be investigated further. But time was running out. The signal was growing stronger by the hour, as though it was being transmitted intentionally, aimed directly at Earth. As the night stretched on, a sudden realization hit Eliza. The frequency of the signal wasn't just random. It was increasing, building toward something. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but her instincts told her that something big was coming. Her heart raced as she tapped into the communications network, pulling up data from every satellite and sensor she could access. She needed to know where the signal was coming from, and more importantly, what it was. The results were alarming. The source of the signal was located within a nearby galaxy, one that was previously thought to be unreachable. It was in a sector known as the Dark Zone, an area of space that was believed to be void of any life due to the immense gravitational forces and cosmic anomalies that made it impossible to explore. But the signal didn't care about those obstacles. It was still coming. Eliza's mind raced. How was it possible that something could survive in such a hostile environment? And who, or what, was sending it? She knew they had to act fast. With the signal getting stronger by the minute, she had no time to waste. She called for a full-scale investigation. We need to send a fleet of reconnaissance ships to investigate the source of this signal. Whatever it is, it's headed toward Earth. As she made the call to higher authorities, she couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful world she had known for years was about to change. This wasn't just another anomaly in space. This was something real, something deliberate. And whatever it was coming fast. The silence in the room was deafening as Eliza's words sank in. The team looked at each other, their faces filled with fear and uncertainty. For the first time in their careers, they realized that humanity might be facing something far greater than they could have ever imagined. The calm before the storm had ended, and now the only thing left was to prepare for whatever was coming next. The mysterious signal, which had seemed like a simple puzzle at first, was now the most pressing mystery humanity had ever faced. As Earth's best minds scrambled to understand it, they knew one thing for certain. Something was coming, and it would change everything. The stage was set, and there was no turning back. The enemy revealed. As the hours passed, the world's eyes were glued to the reports coming in from Earth's communication centers. The mystery signal had now been confirmed as an intentional transmission, and the tension was palpable. People across the globe began to speculate on what this could mean. Was it a friendly message from another species, or something far more dangerous? And most importantly, what was coming toward Earth? The higher-ups in the government were forced to act quickly. World leaders, military officials, and top scientists convened in an emergency summit to discuss the findings. A room full of decision-makers, all trying to understand the implications of this unprecedented event. The room was silent as the data was presented to them, showing that the signal was coming from a region of space previously unexplored. As Dr. Eliza Martin briefed the leaders on the origin of the signal, she revealed the most startling detail. The transmission wasn't just a one-time event. It had been repeating at regular intervals, and each time it grew stronger. Something, or someone, was actively pushing the signal toward Earth. "There's no doubt now," Eliza said, her voice steady. "This is an advanced technology. This signal was intentionally sent to us, and it's coming from a location in the dark zone. It's a region of space we thought was too hostile to sustain life." The audience in the room murmured in disbelief. The dark zone was a mysterious area located light years away, surrounded by black holes, neutron stars, and other cosmic hazards. It was thought to be devoid of any form of life or civilization, due to the extreme conditions. Eliza continued, "This is unlike any technology we've ever encountered. It's almost as if the sender knows we're out here and is purposely directing the signal toward Earth. We don't know the exact intentions of whoever, or whatever, is behind this, but we can't ignore the reality. Something is heading toward us." The tension in the room escalated. The military leaders began to discuss possible responses. "We need to be ready for anything," General Nolan said. "We got to assume this is a threat until proven otherwise. We can't afford to take any chances." Admiral Kara James, head of Earth's space fleet, stood up. Her face was grim, and the weight of responsibility hung heavy on her shoulders. "If they are indeed coming toward Earth, we'll need every resource we have to prepare. Our fleet's current capabilities are nowhere near enough to deal with a threat of this magnitude. We need to act fast." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The implications of facing a technologically superior enemy, potentially from the far reaches of space, were terrifying. Humanity had always looked to the stars with hope, searching for signs of life. But now, faced with the prospect of an unknown civilization arriving with intentions still unclear, fear replaced that hope. Eliza quickly turned her attention back to the signal. As her team continued to analyze the data, a new revelation came to light. The signal wasn't just a call for contact. It had an unusual pattern. At first, they thought it was merely an oddity in the transmission. But after further analysis, it became clear. The signal contained coded information, almost like a blueprint for some kind of advanced technology. "What does this mean?" General Nolan asked, leaning forward. "Is this a trap? A message of peace? Or something else?" "We don't know," Eliza replied, her voice tight with uncertainty. "But what we do know is that we're on the clock. The signal is getting stronger, and whatever it is, it's getting closer." The world's military forces began to mobilize. Fleets of reconnaissance ships were dispatched to gather more data, but the vast distances and the hostile space environment made their mission difficult. The threat was growing ever closer, and every second counted. Every new transmission added to the growing sense of urgency, but no one knew exactly what they were dealing with. Back on Earth, the media frenzy was already in full swing. News outlets around the world broadcasted updates in real time. People were glued to their screens, anxiously awaiting any new information. The uncertainty caused widespread panic, but it also sparked curiosity and excitement. "We need to prepare for the worst," said Admiral James, her voice steady but with an edge of concern. "If they come with peaceful intentions, we'll welcome them. But if they come as enemies, we need to be ready to defend Earth at all costs." With that, the focus shifted to military strategy. Earth's defense systems were old, and their fleet was not designed to deal with an advanced enemy. The warships in the human fleet were equipped with basic weapons, but they were far behind the cutting-edge technology that could be coming from the dark zone. For Eliza, the uncertainty was the hardest part. What did they want? Why were they coming? What did their technology look like? Each question posed a new set of dangers, and with every moment, the threat grew larger. But despite the overwhelming fear, there was also something else: the excitement of the unknown. If these beings were truly advanced, humanity could learn from them. They could unlock the secrets of the universe, travel faster than light, and access knowledge far beyond their imagination. The possibility was staggering. Eliza and her team continued to work around the clock, trying to decode the message embedded in the signal. Each breakthrough brought new hope, but it also added to the anxiety. What were they about to uncover? Was humanity on the brink of making contact with an advanced civilization, or would this encounter lead to war? As Earth prepared for whatever was coming, one thing was certain: everything was about to change. The mystery of the signal was just the beginning, and the truth behind it was more dangerous and exciting than anyone could imagine. The dilemma. As the days passed, the situation became even more urgent. The signal, growing stronger by the hour, had confirmed that an unknown force, an enemy, or perhaps something more complex, was heading toward Earth. The world's governments were in a state of panic, the military on high alert, and humanity was paralyzed by the uncertainty of what awaited them in the stars. Admiral Kara James paced back and forth in her command room, her fingers nervously tapping on the surface of a nearby console. The air was thick with tension, and every officer in the room understood the gravity of the decision they were about to face. It wasn't just about military strategy anymore. It was about the future of humanity. "We have no time to waste," General Nolan said, his voice heavy with frustration. "The fleet is assembled, but we can't wait any longer for more intel. If we don't make a move now, the enemy will reach Earth, and we'll be facing them with our backs to the wall." Admiral James stopped pacing and turned to face her team. Her eyes were filled with determination, but there was a flicker of doubt behind them. She had always been able to make difficult decisions, but this was different. Earth had never faced a threat like this before. "We need to strike before they get here," said Colonel Elizabeth Weaver, her voice sharp. "We can't risk waiting for them to make the first move. We don't know what they're capable of, but we do know they have advanced technology, and it's coming straight for us. We need to take the fight to them." But Admiral James hesitated. She knew the stakes. If they'd made the wrong decision, if they attacked too soon without knowing their enemy's intentions, It could escalate into a full-scale war, a war that humanity might not be ready to fight. And yet, if they waited too long, the enemy could reach Earth, and they would be at their mercy. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the commander was torn, and so did she. Every piece of data had led them to this point, but no answer was clear. She had always trusted her instincts, but this time, those instincts told her that the cost of a wrong move could be catastrophic. "We have no allies out there," Admiral James said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. "We're facing a threat we don't fully understand, and there's no telling what will happen if we make the wrong choice." Her thoughts drifted to the mysterious signal. Every new piece of information was like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. The transmission seemed to be carefully structured, suggesting an intelligence that was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. Could it be a warning? Could they be trying to reach Earth for peaceful purposes? Or was this some sort of preemptive strike, designed to weaken humanity before a larger invasion? "We don't have the luxury of waiting for answers," Colonel Weaver pressed. "The signal is growing stronger, and they're getting closer. If we don't move now, it might be too late." Admiral James took a deep breath and turned to Eliza Martin, the head of the communication team. "What's the latest on the signal?" Eliza, who had been working tirelessly to decode the message, looked up from her console. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with exhaustion. "There's still no clear indication of their intentions," she said. "The message seems to be a mix of patterns and complex code. We're working on deciphering it, but it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. Whatever it is, it's deliberate. And it's heading straight for us." The tension in the room was unbearable. Admiral James looked out the window of the command room, her gaze drifting to the stars. Every fiber of her being wanted to act, to take control of the situation. But deep down, she knew they were in uncharted territory. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. "We can't act without knowing more," she said finally. "But we also can't afford to sit here while they close in on us. We need to make a decision." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the clock was ticking, and the consequences of hesitation could be dire. They were caught in a web of uncertainty, not knowing whether they were dealing with a potential ally, a threat, or something far more dangerous. "Admiral," General Nolan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a seasoned soldier, "we've waited long enough. If we don't act now, we may not get another chance. We're a planet full of people, and it's our responsibility to defend them. We can't wait for a miracle." Admiral James nodded, her mind made up. "You're right. We move out now." With that, the decision was made. The human fleet would be sent into deep space to intercept the mysterious enemy. But the stakes were higher than ever before. The fleet was not equipped with the technology to deal with a foe of unknown power. They would be walking into the unknown, without the clarity they needed to make a successful strike. And yet there was no choice. The enemy was on its way, and humanity's future hung in the balance. As the fleet prepared for launch, Admiral James stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the stars. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were not only preparing for battle, but for an encounter that would change everything. The first strike would determine the course of history. Victory could mean survival, but failure could mean the end of humanity as they knew it. The tension was thick. Every officer, every soldier, and every scientist in the fleet knew this mission could be their last. As the countdown to launch began, there was no turning back. The Earth had made its decision. Now it was time to face the unknown. Preparing for battle. The days leading up to the mission were filled with tension and urgency. The human fleet was now on full alert. With no more time to waste, Admiral Kara James issued the orders. Every ship, every officer, and every crew member knew what was at stake. Earth's fate rested on their shoulders. In the fleet's command center, Admiral James reviewed the final preparations for the battle. The fleet had been assembled with the best ships and crews available, but it was clear that they were outmatched. Most of their technology was based on what Earth had developed over the years, but it was no match for the advanced weaponry that might await them. The fleet had little intelligence on what the enemy ship looked like or how it operated, leaving them vulnerable. "We need every advantage we can get," Admiral James said, her voice firm. "Prepare the photon lance. It's our last hope." The photon lance, a new experimental weapon developed in secret by Earth's best engineers, was humanity's greatest innovation. It was capable of generating a concentrated beam of energy that could potentially cut through the toughest armor, but it had never been tested in real combat. The risks were immense, but the choice was clear. If the fleet could not disable the enemy ship, humanity's chances of survival would be slim. While the weapon was being prepared, the rest of the fleet continued to ready themselves. Each ship's weapon systems were checked and double-checked, ensuring they were functioning perfectly. The pilots practiced maneuvers in simulated battles, their nerves running high. No one could afford to make a mistake. While the weapon was being prepared, the rest of the fleet continued to ready themselves. Each ship's weapon systems were checked and double-checked, ensuring they were functioning perfectly. The pilots practiced maneuvers in simulated battles, their nerves running high. No one could afford to make a mistake. In the fleet's hangars, ground crews worked around the clock, ensuring every fighter jet was fully equipped and ready for battle. It was a scene of organized chaos as military personnel moved with urgency, preparing for a fight that could decide the future of humankind. "We've never faced anything like this before," said Lieutenant David Harris, a seasoned fighter pilot. He paced back and forth, checking the systems on his fighter ship. "We don't know what we're up against, but we can't sit around waiting to be attacked. We've got to hit them hard and fast." His fellow pilots nodded in agreement. No one knew exactly what the enemy's ship would look like, but all of them were ready to do whatever it took. For many, this would be their first real battle, fighting not just for their own lives, but for the survival of their families, their cities, their world. As the fleet moved toward its launch position, Eliza Martin worked tirelessly to decode more of the mysterious signal. Every new bit of data she uncovered only deepened the mystery. What she had assumed were just strange bursts of coded messages now seemed to hint at something far more sinister. The patterns were changing, almost as though the signal was evolving as they got closer to its source. It was clear now that whatever was sending this transmission was aware of their presence and was likely preparing for their arrival. "Eliza, what have you got?" Admiral James asked as she approached her desk. "We're about to engage, and we need every piece of information we can get." Eliza took a deep breath, her face tired but focused. "The signal. It's adapting. It's not just a one-way message anymore. It's responding to us. We might be in for a surprise when we arrive at their location." The tension in the room grew heavier. It seemed that the enemy had been watching humanity just as much as humanity had been trying to understand them. The unknown had now become the known, but it was still shrouded in mystery. "We can't wait any longer," Admiral James said, making the difficult decision. "We launch in 15 minutes. Prepare the fleet." Across the fleet, the final preparations were underway. The ships were in position, and the countdown to departure began. The crews moved with a focused intensity, their faces grim but determined. They knew this wasn't just another military operation. It was the beginning of a fight for humanity's future. As the fleet exited Earth's orbit, heading into deep space, the weight of the mission hit home. For every officer, soldier, and civilian on Earth, this was the moment when they either made history or faced an uncertain, possibly catastrophic future. Back on Earth, the people watched anxiously as the fleet began its journey. News outlets covered every moment, the anticipation palpable across the globe. People held their breath, hoping and praying for humanity's survival. This was the first time Earth had ever faced such a direct existential threat from an unknown enemy. And as the fleet ventured into the unknown, they knew that the battle for humanity's future had only just begun. For Admiral James, there was no turning back. The decision had been made, and the fleet was moving forward. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out into the vast expanse of space. It was dark, cold, and empty, but the silence was comforting, the calm before the storm. "Let's finish this," she muttered to herself, staring out into the unknown. The battle that would decide the fate of Earth was about to begin. And in the heart of space, the mysterious enemy warship waited, silent, powerful, and ready. The final confrontation was at hand. First contact. The human fleet had been in motion for hours, the stars streaking past them as they pushed deeper into the unknown reaches of space. As the fleet neared the location where the signal had originated, the tension was almost unbearable. Every officer, every crew member on each ship felt the weight of the moment. This was no longer just a military operation. It was the fate of Earth itself on the line. Admiral Kara James stood at the helm of her flagship, the U.S. Defiant, her eyes fixed on the large display showing the fleet's progress. Behind her, the crew moved in synchronized efficiency, checking the readiness of their systems and keeping their eyes on their instruments. The calm exterior of the bridge was a stark contrast to the storm brewing in every mind aboard. Everyone knew that they were entering a zone of deep uncertainty. No one knew exactly what to expect. A voice broke the silence. "Admiral, we've detected something. Large mass ahead," Lieutenant Sarah Gray reported, her voice filled with tension. "Are we within visual range?" Admiral James asked. "Not yet, but it's coming up fast." "The size, it's enormous," Lieutenant Gray replied, her eyes glued to the redouts. The ships of the fleet slowed, the distance between them and the unknown enemy closing. There was a sharp stillness as they all stared at the screen, waiting. Then, as they approached the edge of the signal source, it appeared. The massive silhouette of an enemy warship, unlike anything Earth had ever seen, materialized in the distance. The warship was immense, towering in space, covered in sleek, dark armor that shimmered faintly as it reflected the distant starlight. It was like a predator lying in wait, its sharp edges and angular design giving it an intimidating, almost menacing look. The ship was far beyond anything the humans could have imagined in terms of size and firepower. It didn't just look like a ship, it looked like a fortress, a weapon built for conquest. The sight of it sent a ripple of fear through the entire fleet, but no one dared to speak it aloud. "It's like nothing we've ever seen," Admiral James said quietly, her eyes never leaving the massive ship. The fleet's communications officers immediately attempted to establish a connection, sending out signals and requests for communication. But the response was a cold silence. No response came. No words. Only the looming presence of the enemy warship, as if it was waiting. The first round of sensors scanned the vessel, but the results were inconclusive. The technology of the warship was so advanced that their systems were struggling to get any meaningful data. The information they could gather only raised more questions. The ship was radiating powerful energy signatures, but they couldn't identify the source or nature of its power. Was it a weapon? Or something else entirely? "They're not responding to our hails," Communications Officer Brian Hayes reported, his face pale. "They're just sitting there, like they're expecting us." Admiral James clenched her jaw. This silence wasn't comforting. It was the silence of a predator preparing to strike. She knew that the longer they waited, the more dangerous this situation became. "We need to make contact." "Now," Admiral James said, her voice commanding. "Prepare the photon lance. We're going to show them we're not backing down." But before they could take any further action, something unexpected happened. The enemy ship began to move, slowly, deliberately, toward the human fleet. Its movements were almost calculated, as if it was studying them, measuring the distance. The fleet shifted in response, taking up defensive positions, their weapons systems online, but the humans remained silent. It was an eerie dance of observation. The tension grew. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the entire fleet. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the first shot, the first move. But the enemy ship was unyielding, its course steady and sure. Then, as if the warship had grown tired of waiting, a strange and ominous hum filled the air. A pulse of energy shot out from the enemy vessel, cutting across the void of space. The human ships immediately began to brace, anticipating an attack. But to their surprise, the beam of energy didn't come at them. Instead, it was directed toward the heart of their fleet, toward the Defiant. Admiral James's eyes widened. "Evade," she shouted, but it was too late. The beam of energy struck the Defiant with a jolt. The ship shook violently, its hull rattling under the pressure. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and crew members stumbled from the force of the impact. The command center was in chaos as engineers and officers worked frantically to destabilize the ship. "Damage report," Admiral James barked. "We've taken a direct hit, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Gray, her voice shaken. "Hull integrity is holding, but the energy pulse interfered with our systems. We've lost communications with the rest of the fleet. Get them back online," James ordered. She couldn't afford to lose contact now. Her crew scrambled, desperately trying to reestablish the connection. But as the smoke cleared from the Defiant, they saw something even more unsettling. The enemy warship didn't seem to be attacking in the conventional way. Instead, it was broadcasting something. A message, a signal, or perhaps an attempt to communicate. The language was completely alien, but its rhythmic, pulse-like nature was unmistakable. It was a pattern, like the signal they had been tracking for days. "Prepare for response," James said, her tone filled with determination. "They're trying to communicate." It was clear now. This wasn't a random act of aggression. This was something more complex, more deliberate. The enemy wasn't here just to fight. They were here to send a message. The question was, what did they want, and what would humanity's response be? The stage was set for the next phase of this encounter. And with it, the humans knew they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to understand a force beyond their comprehension. The last hope. The atmosphere aboard the U.S. Defiant was tense as Admiral Kara James stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the flashing lights of the enemy warship. The attack, though seemingly non-lethal, had sent a clear message. Earth was under threat. But the real surprise had come in the form of the strange transmission, an alien language that had only added to the confusion. The human fleet had retreated slightly, maintaining a safe distance from the towering enemy ship. Every crew member aboard the Defiant knew that they were facing an advanced and ruthless adversary. With no clear communication and no understanding of what the enemy wanted, the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. Time was running out, and every moment was a countdown to an unknown fate. The damage to the Defiant had been significant but not catastrophic. The energy beam had caused interference with the ship's systems, but they were gradually restoring control. The fleet was now on high alert, ready to respond if the enemy made another move. But the question remained, what was the enemy's true intent? Why had they attacked with that strange energy pulse? And what did their cryptic transmission mean? Admiral James was standing at the window, gazing out at the enemy warship, still looming in space. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead. Earth was not equipped to face this kind of threat. The fleet was powerful, but not powerful enough to take down a ship of this magnitude. Their weapons systems would likely be ineffective against its advanced technology. "We can't wait forever," Colonel Elizabeth Weaver said, stepping up beside the Admiral. "If we don't act soon, we risk the enemy breaking through and reaching Earth. We'll be caught with our defenses down." James turned, her mind racing. She had already made the decision to prepare for a counteroffensive, but now it was clear that they needed to act fast. The situation had reached a critical point. If they didn't launch a decisive strike, the warship could reach Earth and decimate their defenses before they had a chance to respond. But there was one last hope, a weapon humanity had only tested in simulations: the photon lance. "Prepare the photon lance," Admiral James ordered, her voice firm. "It's our only chance." The photon lance was humanity's most advanced weapon, a beam capable of piercing through the strongest of shields. But it had never been used in combat, and its reliability was uncertain. The weapon was a massive gamble. If it failed, Earth would be exposed to an enemy with technology far superior to their own. "We need to get it right," James muttered under her breath, her hands gripping the rail before her. The crew was already preparing the weapon, calibrating the systems and ensuring everything was in place. They would launch everything they had into one final strike, hoping the photon lance could pierce the enemy ship's defenses. The rest of the fleet was standing by, ready to assist with their own firepower, but they knew that their conventional weapons stood no chance. The photon lance was the only viable option. It had to work, or humanity would be at the mercy of the warship's unimaginable power. Eliza Martin, the head of communications, was still trying to decode the transmission from the enemy warship. Every attempt seemed to reveal more questions than answers. But as she studied the data, she made a shocking discovery. The alien transmission wasn't a random set of signals. It was a sequence that seemed to mimic patterns of communication. The signals were not an attack, but a form of dialogue. There was something deliberate about the way the alien ship was sending them. "Eliza, any progress on that transmission?" Admiral James asked, walking over to her console. "It's difficult to say, Admiral," Eliza replied, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and realization. "But the more I study this, the more I believe this might not be an attack at all. It's a conversation." "A conversation." James raised an eyebrow. "I know it sounds crazy, but this pattern, it's structured, not random. They're trying to communicate, but we don't know how to respond." Admiral James stood still for a moment, considering her options. The decision to fire the photon lance would mean committing to an all-out attack. But what if they were misinterpreting the situation? What if the aliens weren't hostile at all? What if they were trying to reach out? "I don't think we have the luxury of waiting any longer," Colonel Weaver said, her voice urgent. "If we don't act now, it could be too late." James hesitated, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She had always believed in fighting to protect Earth, but was this really a fight, or was there still a chance for peace? The warship loomed large in their view, unblinking and powerful. A final decision had to be made. "Eliza, how much longer before we can attempt communication?" James asked. "We could try," Eliza said, her fingers flying over the console. "It's risky. We might trigger a defensive response, but if we can get through to them, maybe we can avoid a war. But if we fail, we won't have time to recover." The room fell silent as everyone waited for the Admiral's order. James took a deep breath, looking around at her crew. They were all counting on her. "We're going to try. Open the channel. But we'll prepare the photon lance at the same time. If they attack, we'll have no choice but to fight." The crew worked quickly, transmitting a carefully crafted message. The fleet held its breath as the signal was sent out, a message of peace, of hope. But as the seconds ticked by, the tension only increased. Then, just as they were about to give up hope, the enemy warship responded. A beam of energy, much like the one they had seen before, shot out from the warship, but this time it was directed toward them, not as a weapon, but as a signal. It was the same rhythmic pulse, the same message they had been receiving, but now it felt different, more deliberate. "We're not alone," Admiral James whispered. "It's not over yet." The warship's response was like nothing they had expected. It wasn't a threat, but a challenge. Humanity had been given one last hope to make contact, but the window for peace was closing fast. The stakes had never been higher. The final move was about to be made. Victory or defeat. The tension in the command center was unbearable as the human fleet stood poised, waiting for the next move. The enemy warship, its dark, imposing silhouette still hanging in space like an insurmountable wall, had responded, not with another attack, but with an unsettlingly calm signal. Admiral Kara James couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision they now faced. Humanity had always been prepared for war, but peace? That was uncharted territory. Admiral James glanced at Eliza Martin, who was still trying to decipher the strange transmission. The signals had been relentless, like a puzzle with no clear solution. But now, there was something different in the air. It was a standoff, an unsettling, silent challenge, not one that screamed hostility, but one that demanded a response. "We're receiving another signal," Eliza said suddenly, her voice urgent but steady. "It's different from the others. It's more structured, like they're waiting for us to answer." "Can we understand it yet?" Admiral James asked, her voice carrying the weight of command. "It's difficult to interpret," Eliza replied, biting her lip. "But I think this is their way of offering us a chance to engage. It's like a challenge, not just a call for communication. They're testing us." Testing. The word echoed in James's mind. Were the aliens looking for strength, or were they trying to gauge whether humanity could offer something more than just weapons? "We have no choice," Colonel Elizabeth Weaver spoke up. "They've made their move. If we don't respond, if we don't show strength, they could interpret it as weakness. We might lose this opportunity to negotiate before it's too late." Admiral James's gaze shifted back to the massive enemy vessel. Its towering presence made her heart race, but she couldn't afford hesitation. The fleet had already been through so much. They had come too far to turn back now, but every instinct told her to be cautious. The last thing she wanted was to start a war they weren't prepared to fight. The next move would be crucial. If the humans failed to respond in the right way, they would lose any chance of peaceful resolution. The enemy might perceive any show of weakness as a sign that humanity could be easily defeated. With a deep breath, James made a decision. "We're going to prepare for both options. We'll continue to send a peaceful response, but we'll be ready for anything. Prepare the photon lance." Eliza quickly initiated the communication sequence, sending a carefully crafted message of peace, but also one that conveyed humanity's resolve. The message was clear. "We are not an easy target, but we are willing to listen." The minutes that passed felt like hours. Each second stretched into eternity. The enemy warship remained silent, as if waiting for a sign of humanity's readiness. Then, without warning, a response came. This time, it wasn't a pulse of energy, nor an ambiguous signal. It was something more direct. The massive warship began to slowly shift, its engines igniting with a low hum. The alien ship was moving toward them. "Brace for impact," Colonel Weaver shouted, her voice strained. But as the warship approached, the humans were stunned. It didn't fire any weapons. It didn't make any aggressive moves. Instead, it halted just outside of the human fleet's range and emitted a long, low-frequency sound. It was as if the warship was communicating in a way they hadn't anticipated. "We've got another transmission coming through," Eliza called out, fingers dancing over the console. "It's different again. It's almost like a song." "A song?" James echoed in confusion. "What does that mean?" "I think it's some kind of recognition," Eliza said, her brow furrowing. "This isn't just a signal. They're acknowledging us. It's a form of communication we didn't expect, but it's clear they're trying to engage in dialogue." The realization hit like a tidal wave. The warship, the massive vessel that had loomed over them as a harbinger of doom, wasn't a weapon at all. It was a vessel of communication. It was waiting to see how humanity would react, how they would interpret the challenge laid before them. Admiral James's heart raced as she processed the new information. This was no longer just about defense or war. It was about diplomacy, about showing the strength to engage, and the wisdom to understand that not every conflict needed to end in destruction. "We'll respond," James said, her voice steady with resolve. "Prepare our final message. Let them know we're ready to talk." As the humans sent out their response, the fleet held its breath. What was coming next? Was this the moment they would find peace, or would it be the beginning of an all-out war? The universe had opened up a new door for humanity, and now they had to step through it. The silence was deafening. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the enemy ship moved once more, this time retracting its weapons and lowering its shields. It was retreating. But in doing so, it left a single, unmistakable signal, a symbol of peace, a gesture of understanding. The humans couldn't believe it. For the first time, they had faced the unknown, and the unknown had backed down, not through force, but through communication. The warship's retreat wasn't a sign of fear, it was a sign of respect. They had been tested, and they had passed. The fleet was silent for a moment, and then the command center erupted in a burst of relieved laughter and cheers. The battle had been avoided, but humanity knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. They had taken their first steps into the wider universe, and with this encounter, they had earned the chance to prove their worth as part of a greater cosmic community. Admiral James looked out at the stars once more, but this time, there was no fear in her heart. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. And with that, humanity had learned an invaluable lesson. Strength wasn't just in weapons and ships. It was in understanding, in reaching out even when the unknown seemed threatening. But as the fleet turned back toward Earth, Admiral James couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the first of many tests yet to come. The universe was vast, and who knew what challenges lay ahead? But humanity had proven that it was ready to face them head on.